What's up, you bastards? It's Mike here. Long time no see. Uh, had a lot of crap going on with this computer and got new internet, faster internet. So yeah, hopefully I'll be picking back up now on what I was doing. So this video is another. It's the same MGTOW Tales #1, but this is gonna be part two. I didn't do anything, or if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. This is the story of my mother, and basically what it was like having to live under her. As I've said before, I know this is probably on the surface sounding like it's airing dirty laundry, and if it is, oh well, I think this story needs to be told. So, when I last left off, I was talking about the cokehead guy that my mom had been with for a while, and we had pretty much ran down to Virginia to be with my grandparents, and my grandparents had pretty much run him off. He tried his damnedest to talk to me after the fact, but they weren't having it. So things settled down a bit. We stayed with my grandparents for a good while. My mom had taken a bus back to Ohio to pack up all of our stuff and move it from there to where we lived in a storage shed. This was just until we were able to find a place for us to live, separate of them. But during this time, my mom started reconnecting with other family members, with her cousins specifically. That family member who always partied and sold drugs? Yeah, that one. So my grandparents were not happy that she was hanging out with him again. To them, it seemed like she was heading right back down the same road that they had just rescued her from. And they were right. If I remember correctly, she was even threatened to be kicked out of the house if she didn't stop hanging out with them. Of course, that happened to every family member that ever stayed with them. The whole threatening to kick them out if they didn't straighten up. But usually, as always, it never happened. Just a lot of bitching. So it didn't take long before she had found a place to move into for me and my sister and her. It was a 3-bedroom trailer in a trailer park on the other side of the city that my grandparents lived. And actually, city's kind of a misnomer because they lived way outside the city. It was still considered that town, but I mean, this was, you had like 7 miles till you even got to the hub of town from where they were at, and we were just on the other side of the actual city limits from where they lived at. So for some time leading up to the move, Mom had been getting back in contact with the guy who initially left her to raise his kid. The one she tried to rebound and revenge fuck another guy, and so he'll take me back kind of thing. Well, he apparently wasn't doing all that well with that woman and wanted to get back together with my mom. And this was probably a little bit before Christmas, but I think he had to get his stuff straight and everything too, because he didn't quite have the money and the means and whatnot yet. But at the time, I was ecstatic. I bragged to my grandparents about how much better he was than the last guy, because I had had nothing but positive experiences with him up until then. They were skeptical, and with good reason, but they decided to take my word for it anyway and give him the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't like there was anything that they could do, honestly. My mother was a full-grown adult. Well, still is, but, full-grown adult. She could do whatever the hell she wanted. And as I said, we moved into that trailer right before Christmas. And it wasn't until the spring that my mom drove up and got him from Ohio. As a matter of fact, I distinctly remember it not being until then, because the winter storm we had in February of that year pretty much left me, my mom, and my sister snowed in the trailer. The snow drifts and everything had blown up on this tall front porch and up the back porch, and we could not get a single door open for the life of us. So my grandfather had to come over with a snow shovel and help dig out the door so we could at least get out. We had gone grocery shopping just before the storm hit, so as long as the power held out, we were pretty well fine. But he moved in during the spring, and one thing I always remember about him is that he used to ride his bike everywhere that he went. I found out later it was because he kept getting DUIs and he had his license revoked. Anyway, he made this 10-speed bike his own. It had mirrors on the side of it, a crate attached to the back that held a battery with a battery charger and speakers, all attached to an old car radio that he had mounted on the handlebars. You could hear him coming from a mile away. And if that weren't enough, he also had headlights and taillights, plus an orange whip flag on the back of it, so you could also see him from a mile away. He brought this bike up with him, and if nothing else, he was very creative, and it showed. He had a lot of skills in carpentry and stuff like that. He was, carpenter and roofer by trade. Immediately upon moving in, he completely took over the house. His first order of business was putting up blinds all around this front porch. We had already had the ceiling on it, the roof on it, and it was semi-closed in. He had railings all around it. It was kind of like a deck in a way. He put up blinds all around, covering it in. He built shelves for my mom's plants and his tools, and put up a small gate at the top of the stairs. It was a nice place to be when it got hot, plus it had privacy from the neighbor. Well, my sister and I were expected to stay outside most of the day, only allowed to come back in for bathroom breaks and meals. Water was usually provided to us, but usually it wasn't until after dinner that we were allowed to stay inside for the night. They stayed inside all day, listened to the radio, smoked pot, and played the Nintendo my sister and I had gotten just that Christmas. Her and I came up with many ways to entertain ourselves despite all that, including riding our bikes up and down the trailer park, which was a bitch because it was a hill one way. It was on a hill. You could ride down that thing fast as hell, but you had to walk the thing back up. We played on the porch, board games, whatever, and most of the time we spent playing under the porch. It was a whole lot cooler under the porch and near the ground, and it was a lot of loose and dry dirt, and I had a whole lot of Matchbox cars back then, so we just kind of rough up this dirt and kind of pad it a little bit, and then you'd make roads and stuff with it and run the Matchbox cars in the roads and everything that you made, towns and this and that. I mean, it was pretty neat. And we also spent time drawing cats and dogs and cuss words because, we were little kids. That's what you do. So besides some of those mild irritations, everything seemed fine. Besides his objection to us playing under the porch, which it kind of pissed him off because he said it made us look like a bunch of hillbillies. Kids are going to be kids, and they're going to play wherever they're going to play at, and really, if they're minding their own business and keeping to themselves and not fighting, what the hell? But whatever. Tensions had also started rising between he and my grandparents. My grandparents kept a garden going for several years. They basically, after my grandmother's mother and father had died, they got the house, and it was on like an acre of land and stuff, and I can't remember if they used to keep the garden on the property, but I know when they passed away, my grandparents planted this garden, and I could be way off here, but it probably was about 30 foot wide by 50 foot long. It could have been a lot bigger, but it's also been 25 years ago now or more. They planted the garden in the spring with he and my mom's help, and they were asked to come over nearly every day to help water and weed the garden out. As it came time for things to get harvested, my grandparents threw a fit when they were asked about getting some of the vegetables that my mom and her boyfriend had helped all summer to grow. Frustrated, he and my mom stopped going over every day like they had been, and my grandparents were not too happy about their quote-unquote abandonment. Since this was our first year in that place, we were just getting established. We were responsible for keeping our patch of the yard mowed. It was a postage stamp, but we were still responsible. But we didn't have a lawnmower. A friend of the family had one, but it was in very poor shape. This thing had been rebuilt from like 3 or 4 other lawnmowers. The deck was different, the handles was different, the Briggs & Stratton motor was probably a Briggs & Stratton and Sears & Roebuck and fucking I don't know what else, but I mean, yeah, this thing was Frankenmower. So being somewhat of a mechanic, my mom's boyfriend took the mower anyway, and he was able to get it running over the course of a couple of days. During that time, I wanted to help, and I helped doing with what I could, handed him tools and stuff. However, I remember him getting cross with me for some reason. And he ended up chucking a medium-sized wrench at me, racking one of my shins. Don't know what that was over. It's still been a long time. So things escalated from there. There was one night, around the beginning of summer break, they were hanging out at my mom's cousin's place, the same drug-taking and selling partier that I mentioned just a little earlier. We had been there all day, as we usually did. I mean, several times a week, all day. But this day, we had been there an exceptionally long time. I was at the age where I was too old to play with their kids because their oldest was like 6 years younger, 7 years younger than me, but of course I was too old to be hanging around the adults. So there was only so much playing outside by myself that I could stand, and at about 11 p.m. or so, I started complaining. I was tired, hungry, and bored, and just wanted to go home. He and Mom were talking to a couple of people out in the gravel parking lot of the small little trailer court that the cousin lived at, and this place actually was not very far away from my grandparents. I'd say about 4 or 5 miles away. I didn't know at the time, but what was going on was a deal for some pot. Of course, I had no awareness of this, and after a couple attempts to get their attention, he grabs me up just by my shirt and flings my then 10-year-old body nearly 15 feet out into this gravel lot. Somehow I had managed to turn around like a cat and landed on one of my knees real hard, bruising and busting it up quite a bit. It was cut and scraped up pretty good and bleeding. I didn't know what to make of it. It was the first time anybody had ever done anything like that to me, and the only thing I could do was sit and cry. Actually, I was exceptionally worried because earlier in the year, the place had a septic tank leak, and there'd pretty much been a permanent puddle in the in the lot for quite a while. Once they finally got the septic tank fixed, the puddle went away, but I was kind of scared over what might have still been lingering in the dirt. Well, my mom came walking over, got me in the car, started cleaning off my knee with some of her mixed drink, and telling me, oh, I should just behave, and that he was having a grown-up conversation and whatnot. Not even a care in the world that her boyfriend just picked up her son and tossed him knees first onto the gravel. I still have the scar after 25 years. So, later on that summer, it was nearly fall, probably before the start of the school year, had another one of those long-ass days over at my mom's cousin's house. Grandparents had increased their meddling in my mom's affairs, and coupled with his frustration at them and his increasing comfort level with us being at an all-time high, his first major explosion was about to take place. He wasn't the type of guy who should be drinking. At all. Once he started, he didn't know how to stop. He didn't stop until he either passed out or he was way too tired to continue. And he was a mean drunk. My mom would always joke and say that it was usually fine until he had that quote-unquote magic beer that turned his attitude around at the drop of a hat. It was bad enough that he was a mean drunk, but he couldn't drink anything harder than beer because it got him very angry very quickly. He was aware of this, but for some reason, that night he decided to have a couple of shots. An argument broke out at the cousin's house that continued all the way home. Once we were home, my mom thought it best to drive my sister and I over to our grandparents until he had cooled down. In a fit of rage, he gets out of the passenger side of our 77 Monte Carlo, crawls up on top of the hood, and starts bashing the windshield in with his elbow, nearly caving it in. My sister and I were terrified, but that was enough to make my mom pull back into the driveway, for some odd reason or another. So my sister and I, as soon as the car stopped, got out and made a run for anywhere. We started running down the hill, running down the lot to the end of this trailer court. We didn't care. We were trying to get away. She literally had to chase us down to get us to stop. Eventually, we ended up staying the night at home anyway, despite his attitude. But he did go in and go to bed right away. I think he had enough awareness of what it was he did, because he'd never crossed that line before then, but he never exercised the same awareness much afterwards. So, tensions remained high, and several other incidents occurred over the course of the summer up through early fall, right up into the next school year, my 5th grade year. It's strange how sometimes saying very little ends up saying so much. The change in my behavior was noticeable by my fellow classmates and the administration. They came to me one day asking if everything was all right at home, and I let out with it. That afternoon, I was told a social worker had stopped by the house before the end of the school day to talk to my mom. Immediately went into a fit of rage on the defensive, claiming that nothing of the sort had been going on at all, and if they wanted me so badly to just take me away, all the while gathering up some of my clothes and throwing them at the social worker, scattering them outside the door, onto the porch, into the yard. Nothing was ever done about this. And I came home to possibly one of the most stressful times I had ever had up until that point. For some instinctual reason, I guess I didn't get a spanking or get hit that day. I'm guessing because they knew if they left any marks on me, the administration, who were already on high alert, would have had the evidence they needed to file some kind of charges. I was grounded for a week, however. Radio taken out of my room, door taken off the hinges, Pictures and things ripped off the wall and left with only a bed and a desk. I guess that showed me opening my mouth about getting abused and shit. One thing I really wanted to do once I had the opportunity was to participate in the school band. I wanted to play the trumpet, but to my dismay, neither one of them would part with the $12 a week to rent one. He had the money to drink, and they both had the money for pot, but for some reason, just couldn't spare a couple of dollars on my interests. This is one of the first of many disappointments in the way of school activities. Since I was turned down for the money for a musical instrument, I thought it best not to ask for any money for anything else. This included the materials I needed for a school project. I procrastinated on this project for so long. Once he found out, I was severely punished and forced to push the project out in a matter of hours instead of the weeks that I originally had. Several months later, around October, November, possibly due to neighbor problems, landlord dispute, or just a need to be somewhere else, we moved to the next town over. This was a nice 3-bedroom house with a basement and an open garage. The school was right within sight of the front door. There were train tracks that led right by the house, and they were run right through the center of town. We lived right beside those tracks. I'll never forget the first night the train came through about midnight or so. Scared the hell out of my mom so badly. She jumped out of bed, got my sister awake, and ran down the hall to get me in the next bedroom over. As the train passed and the horn sounded, she realized what it was. She had to stop and laugh. She left her boyfriend sleeping in the bed to fend off whatever it was she thought was out to get us. Quite a turn in her attitude that I don't think I'd ever seen again for quite a while. So as usual, the first little while in that house wasn't so bad. Getting used to the new place, the area, the school took a bit of time. This quickly wore away because once Christmas came around, tempers flared like usual. There was a huge fight between them that started at my mom's cousin's house, again at the cousin's. Lasted throughout the car ride home, including him almost swerving off the road several times. Yes, even with a revoked license, he still insisted on driving. And this fight lasted all through the night, Christmas Eve. There was throwing of things, the presents under the tree were damaged, and if that wasn't all, they had made my sister and I clean up things afterwards, in the middle of the night. Imagine trying to act surprised in the morning, opening gifts that you had practically had to rewrap just a few hours earlier. And if that wasn't all, my mom made me hand him his gift, pack of socks, knowing that they'd had to fight the night before, and now he's sitting there stewing in his frustration from the previous night's altercation. Give Daddy his present. Fuck me. I wanted to just be shot right then and there. It didn't help that a real bad ice storm hit the area right after the new year, causing tree limbs to fall, power being cut because of said trees and ice, and school being canceled for nearly a month. Luckily, the basement had a wood heat stove installed, but we didn't keep much wood around. We never really thought we needed it. So after a day or so, we all went to my grandparents' house after our small little supply of wood ran out, because they used wood heat exclusively. They even had one of those old Majestic wood cook stoves. Eating was never an issue with them because they always had canned food in the dairy. They always had food because they were always stingy about the shit. I mean, they had 2 big chest freezers in the well house, and like I said, that dairy was basically a building that was built into a cutout in the side of a hill. They kept all their canned goods and stuff. It stayed cool even in the summertime. But this particular year, I don't remember my grandparents being without power like we were. Like I said, they were completely a town, almost 2 towns over. So Mom did what she could to send me and my sister somewhere where we could be warm. Being that I was going to a new school, I had some adjusting to do as well. However, tensions at home were still very high. No real extreme incident stands out in my mind in the very early months of that year, other than the usual getting slapped around and my ass beat with a leather belt for not doing chores and other questionably actionable offenses whose punishment certainly did not fit the crime. Oh, and this wasn't just a swat on the ass either. He hit hard enough to leave bruises on my ass. My grandparents had taken pictures several times. Of course, the slapping me across the face was done in such a way as not to leave marks, but he wasn't very happy about me being overweight as a child, and he once told me that if I didn't do something to lose the weight, he was going to cut it off. There were more and more long nights at the cousin's house, and they had just moved, about the same time we did, to another place within the town limits of the town they were living in. So all their arguing late at night and my grandparents still meddling, because they would follow him around town and be pretty much trolling by the cousin's house to see if they can catch him and my mom there. But one thing in particular is that he had a bad habit of grabbing me by the hair and trying to drag me to my room or wherever it was he wanted me in the house. However, when the summer came around and my cousin came down, we got the bright idea to buzz it all off, and me and my cousin walked around looking like twin cue balls. It was great, it was nice and cool during the summer, and no more head handle. He never explicitly said so, but I'm sure it really pissed him off. So, just like the last year, this school administration and classmates picked up on my odd behavior. I was called to talk to the school counselor, who I told what was going on. I begged him not to make a fuss about it because what had happened the last time. I really don't remember anything else being said or done after that. I think a social worker may have stopped by, and my mom handled it much more calm and collected than she did the last time. Maybe they showed up, maybe they didn't. It's been such a long time, some things aren't perfectly clear in my mind. So the fighting increased by the spring. One night he was drinking and got pulled over with my mom and the cousin in the front seat. Myself, my sister, and the cousin's two boys in the back seat together. He had nearly sideswiped the police cruiser. The officer, of course, hits the lights and starts to follow. It took him a little while to catch up, but in the meantime, the cousin quickly rolls down the window, throws out a bag of pot. My mom's in the middle, stuffing cheese balls down her throat to try to hide her alcohol breath, and the boyfriend is trying to find a place to pull over while steadily asking my mom to try to change spots with him. This was a big 77 Monte Carlo with bench seats. It was completely and totally possible, although, it was a little too late at that point. They had done that before, but of course with the cousin in the seat it was a little bit harder. Well, the switch never really happened. So he pulls in at a McDonald's, the cop shows up, takes his information, and has him take the sobriety test, breathalyzer included. The other kids with me in the back seat are losing their minds. Secretly, I'm hoping that the cop arrests him. To my relief, they do. She proceeds to take the cousin and his kids home. Then we go home. He spends the weekend in jail and is soon bailed out. Cut to a few weeks later, he's still waiting on the court date. The pressure gets to him, and one night a real bad fight breaks out. I think it started at the cousin's house, but it exploded in the parking lot of a Wendy's. First, I remember him having to go back through the drive-thru several times because he just wasn't happy with his baked potato with chili and chives. We finally pulled into an empty parking spot to eat, and that's when the fight took off. They were in the front seat, just yelling at each other, my sister and I having to listen to it while trying to eat in the back seat. Of course, this has been such a normal thing for me at this point that with the exception of the usual, heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach, I really wasn't that fazed at all. The fight had continued after we ate and all the way home. So once arriving home, my sister and I were sent off to bed directly. But the fight became physical at one point, and he had shoved a huge coffee table into her shins and grabbed a picture of, a picture in a frame, and Chinese star style threw this picture at her head. The corner of the frame stuck in the drywall, and the picture remained with the corner embedded in the sheetrock, standing straight out, perpendicular to the wall. He still hadn't quite got to the point of being directly physical with her yet, but still, things had finally gotten so bad, she decided to kick him out of the house. He spends several weeks over at the cousin's house. During that time, he's trying to figure out what he was going to do, all the while screwing around with the cousin's wife. This woman was as nasty and ugly as they came anyway. She once reached out and shook a guy's dick instead of his hand because he had a case of beer in one hand and a bottle of liquor in the other and didn't have a free hand to shake hands. So she grabbed the only handle she thought was necessary. Since summer vacation had just started, my aunt and my uncle came out with their kids, and we spent a week hanging out at home, us kids just having a good time, hanging out with our cousins. Well, he shows back up at the house during that week, wanting to know if my mom still loved him and if she would take him back. She refused to let him back in the house. He was very upset, and so much so that my mom felt the need to file a restraining order against him. A lot went on that day, but I will say it ended on a good note, as at the end of it all, we all went to the theater to see the Flintstones movie. This was back in '94, and eventually he got enough money for a bus and took back off up to Ohio. later on that year, Mom took us kids out to visit the same aunt and uncle for the 4th of July. We set off fireworks and watched movies and things, and it was a great time. So I'm going to end this one here. There's going to be a part 3 and probably a part 4, but this next part is going to highlight a lot of the stuff that she had allowed to happen in the couple of years before actually bringing the guy back. Believe it or not. There was, random people staying over and partying going on and a bunch of other stuff. And yeah, it never ended. So, everyone take care and thank you for listening. And see you later, you bastards.